Good morning. Mr. Dahl here with your Chapter 15, Section 1 reading, Conquest in the Americas. In 1492, explorer Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean islands that are now called the West Indies. The wave of exploration he spurred in the Americas would have drastic, far-reaching consequences for the people who already lived there. First encounters in the Americas. Columbus's first meeting with Native Americans began a cycle of encounter, conquest, and death that would be repeated throughout the Western Hemisphere. Meeting the Taino. When Columbus first arrived in the West Indies, he encountered the Taino people. The Taino lived in villages and grew corn, yams, and cotton, which they wove into cloth. They were friendly and open toward the Spanish. Columbus noted that they were generous with what they have, to such a degree that no one would believe but he who had seen it. Despite the friendly reception, relations soon soured. The Taino offended the Spanish, when out of ignorance they failed to pay proper respect to Christian symbols. Columbus's actions showed that he felt himself superior to the Taino and could therefore decide their fate. He claimed their land for Spain and then took several Taino as prisoners to take back to the Spanish king. Columbus's encounter was repeated by a wave of Spanish conquistadors, or conquerors, who soon arrived in the Americas. They first settled in the islands of Hispaniola, now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. Throughout the region, the conquistadors seized the Native Americans' gold ornaments and then made them pan for more gold. At the same time, the Spanish forced the Native Americans to convert to Christianity. Guns, horses, and disease. Although Spanish conquistadors only numbered in the hundreds as compared to millions of Native Americans, they had many advantages. Their guns and cannons were superior to the Native Americans' arrows and spears, and European metal armor provided better protection. They also had horses, which not only were useful in battle and in carrying supplies, but also frightened the Native Americans who had never seen a horse. Most importantly, an invisible invader, disease, helped the conquistadors take control of the Taino and other Native Americans. Europeans unknowingly carried diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza to which Native Americans had no immunity or resistance. These diseases spread rapidly and wiped out village after village. As a result, the Native American population of the Caribbean islands declined by as much as 90% in the 1500s. Millions of Native Americans died from disease as Europeans made their way inland. Checkpoint. How did Spanish conquistadors treat the Taino? Cortez conquers Mexico. From the Caribbean, Spanish explorers probed the coast of the Americas. They spread stories of empires rich in gold, but they also told of fierce fighting people. Attracted by the promise of riches as well as by religious zeal, a flood of adventurers soon followed. Cortez advances on the Aztecs. Among the earliest conquistadors was Hernan Cortez. Cortez, a landowner in Cuba, heard of Spanish expeditions that had been repelled by Indians. He believed that he could succeed where none had before. In 1519, he landed on the coast of Mexico with about 600 men, 16 horses, and a few cannons. They began an inland trek towards Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. A young Indian woman named Malinche, called Donna Marina by the Spanish, served as a translator and advisor. Malinche knew both the Maya and Aztec languages, and she learned Spanish quickly. Malinche told Cortez that the Aztecs had gained power by conquering other groups of people. The Aztecs sacrificed thousands of their captives to the Aztec gods each year. Many conquered people hated the Aztec overlords, so Malinche helped Cortez arrange alliances with them. They agreed to help Cortez fight the Aztecs. Montezuma faces a dilemma. Meanwhile, messengers brought word about the Spanish to the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma. Terrified, he wondered if the leader of the pale-skinned, bearded strangers might be Quetzalcoatl, an Aztec god king who had long ago vowed to return from the east. Because Montezuma did not know for sure if Cortez was a god, he did not know how to respond to the news. He sent gifts of turquoise, feathers, and other goods with religious importance, but urged the strangers not to continue to Tenochtitlan. Cortez, however, had no intentions of turning back. He was not interested in the Aztec religious objects, but was extremely interested in the gold and silver ornaments that Montezuma began sending him. Cortez became more determined than ever to reach Tenochtitlan. Fighting and negotiating by turns, Cortez led his forces inland towards the capital. At last, the Spanish arrived in Tenochtitlan, where they were dazzled by the grandeur of the city. Tenochtitlan falls to the Spanish. Montezuma welcomed Cortez to his capital. However, relations between the Aztecs and Spaniards soon grew strained. The Spanish scorned the Aztec religion and sought to convert them to Christianity. At the same time, as they remained in the city, they saw more of the Aztec treasure. They decided to imprison Montezuma so they could gain control of the Aztecs and their riches. Cortez compelled Montezuma to sign over his land and treasure to the Spanish. In the meantime, a new force of Spanish conquistadors had arrived on the coast to challenge Cortez. In the confusion that followed, with various groups of Spanish, Aztec, and Native Americans all fighting for control, the Aztecs drove the Spanish from the city. More than half of the Spanish were killed in the fighting, as was Montezuma. Cortez retreated to plan an assault. In 1521, in a brutal struggle, Cortez and his Indian allies captured and demolished Tenochtitlan. The Spanish later built Mexico City on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. As in the Caribbean, disease had aided their cause. Smallpox had spread among the Aztecs from the 1519 encounter, decimating the population. Checkpoint. What impact did the Aztecs' religious beliefs have on Cortez's approach to Tenochtitlan? Pizarro takes Peru. Cortez's success inspired other adventurers, among them Spaniard Francisco Pizarro. Pizarro was interested in Peru's Incan Empire, which was reputed to have more riches than the Aztecs. Pizarro arrived in Peru in 1532, just after Incan ruler Atahualpa had won the throne from his brother in a bloody civil war. A civil war is fought between groups of people in the same nation. Pizarro's secretary described Atahualpa as a man of 30 years, good-looking and poised, somewhat stout, with a wide, handsome, and ferocious face, and the eyes flaming with blood. Atahualpa refused to become a Spanish vassal or convert to Christianity. In response, Pizarro, aided by Indian allies, captured him and slaughtered thousands of Inca. The Spanish demanded a huge ransom for the ruler. The Inca paid it, but the Spanish killed Atahualpa anyway. Despite continuing resistance, Pizarro and his followers overran the Incan heartland. They had superior weapons, and the Inca were weakened by European diseases. From Peru, Spanish forces surged across Ecuador and Chile. Before long, Spain had added much of South America to its growing empire. Pizarro himself was killed by a rival Spanish faction a few years after he established the city of Lima. Checkpoint. What factors encouraged Spanish success in Peru? Effects of the Spanish conquistadors. The Spanish conquistadors accomplished a major victory in the Americas. Within a few decades, a few hundred European soldiers, helped by superior weapons, horses, and especially disease, had conquered millions of Native Americans. The Spanish had seized huge quantities of valuable goods, and they had used Native American labor to establish silver mines in Peru and Mexico to finance their new empire. In the 1500s and early 1600s, treasure fleets sailed each year to Spain or to Spanish Philippines loaded with gold and silver. With this wealth, Spain became Europe's greatest power. The effect on Native Americans, however, was quite different. Some Native Americans believed that the disasters they suffered marked the world's end. As tens of thousands of Indians died, some of the bewildered and demoralized survivors felt that their gods were less powerful than the God of their conquerors. They therefore stopped resisting. Many Native Americans converted to Christianity in the hopes that their suffering would end. Yet many Indians continued to resist the Spanish in any way they could. For centuries, the Maya fought Spanish rule in Mexico and Central America. Long after the death of Atahualpa, revolts erupted among the Inca, and throughout the Americas, Indians resisted European influences by preserving aspects of their own culture, including language, religious traditions, and clothing. In time, Native American culture came to influence the culture of Latin America. The early encounters between the Spanish conquistadors and Native Americans had long-lasting impacts that reached far beyond these two groups. By establishing an empire in the Americas, Spain dramatically changed the pattern of global encounter set in motion with the first European explorers of Africa. For the first time, much of the world was now connected by sea routes, on which traveled ships carrying goods, people, and ideas. Checkpoint. In what ways did Native Americans resist Europeans? That's the end of section 1. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.